All right. So today I'd like to explore together with you a truth, a reality, I guess a reality, a truth. I don't know. It's up to you to determine what it is for you, but I'm going to make the invitation, point something out, and then explore that together with you so that potentially you could um, experience genuine transformation in your life rather than just continuing to try harder in your life. Because a lot of the time, what happens is we are unhappy in some way. We're feeling distressed. We could say there's some kind of suffering of some kind, big suffering, little suffering, however you understand it. But you want some change, right? You'd like for things to be different. And you do what you think you could do to produce that change, but you don't get the change that you were looking for. And the part of the reason for that is because you are still doing what it is that you were previously doing that was producing the experience that you don't like, but you were trying to add a layer on top of that, trying to change it through force. So the uh, metaphor that I often use to illustrate this, which I'll use now, is that if you're making a fist, you could test this out. You could humor me and make a fist now. So you make a fist and really squeeze the fist, just squeeze, 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 and you start to feel the fatigue, the discomfort of it. And you start to realize, gee, I don't like this. I don't like this experience. I really would like for it to be different. And you even maybe look down at your fist and you realize, well, gee whiz, I am making a fist, and that must be the problem. The problem is the fist. If only I didn't have a fist, then I wouldn't be having this problem. So I know what the solution is. The solution is to get rid of the fist. Makes sense, right? That must be the solution. Well, so you Google, how do I get rid of a fist? You ask ChatGPT, how do I get rid of a fist? You go to some kind of online forum. How do I get rid of a fist? You go to some kind of group, people who have fists, who are trying to get rid of their fists, and you come up with a plan, which is you got another hand, right? So it's not like there's nothing you could do. You could use your other hand to pry open the fist. So you pry open the fist, and then you say, "Wow, look at that! Look at that! I've pried open the fist. I've gotten rid of the fist." But then you don't really feel any better, and you can't figure out why that is. Because whether it looks like a fist or it doesn't look like a fist, the underlying mechanism that you were using, which resulted in the fist, is still operating. You haven't undone it. You were just using force on top of the exertion that you're already making. So you really kind of lost because you squandered more energy in an attempt to make the change. So, of course, you're not going to feel better, not for any extended period of time. So, in order to make a change, at a really fundamental level, a really meaningful change, in fact, what I would call a real transformation, it's necessary to stop doing what it is that you've been doing that was producing the experience that you didn't want. Hopefully that makes sense. So, in case it doesn't make sense, just to make it explicit, so going back to the metaphor of making the fist, instead of prying it open, it's much more efficient, effective, pleasurable, gives much better outcome if instead of trying to pry it open, you actually bring some awareness and realize what you're doing in the first place and learn how to stop doing that. So instead of just achieving what on the surface looks like or approximates what you imagine the solution must be, You actually find out, how am I producing the unwanted experience in the first place, and then release it. So it's not about just getting a surface level appearance of what you think the solution must be, because that doesn't really give you the actual change that you want. It's about discovering at a deeper level what it is that you're doing that's producing the unwanted experience, and then learning how to stop doing that. Now that seems obvious, right? Once I've pointed it out. So you could just start. I mean, that right there, just that one thing, which was not actually that's just kind of the context of what it is in and of itself. What on earth was that? There's some noise that was made. Anyway, uh, that is that was just the context. But that alone, if you actually work with that consistently, if you explore in your actual experience, what is it that you're doing that's producing the experience that you don't like? That alone is going to give you more genuine, lasting, true transformation that you can experience in a positive way than probably 99% of the other things that you've tried up to now. So, and that was just, that's sort of incidental in a way. So hopefully you can understand how powerful and transformative that is, and actually apply that. Because if you don't apply it, you're not going to get the results, which I guess is one of the useful things to keep in mind. One, most people don't get real transformation in their lives, and a big part of that is that they just don't have awareness of what's really going on. And then secondary to that is, even when they have some degree of awareness of what's going on, usually people then don't actually work with and apply what it is that they've discovered. Well, you can't really expect to get the results if you don't apply the thing. It's sort of, we have this expression in English that you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. It's kind of like that. I mean, you can lead yourself to the water, which is to have that recognition, at least on some level, yeah, at least intellectually, to understand what it is that I've pointed out here so far. But then to drink is, in this case, to actually apply that in a practical way to your life, which means on a daily basis, moment to moment basis, to actually be curious about, okay, I'm getting some feedback. The feedback, if there's feedback that you're like, I don't really think this is my optimal experience. There's something about this experience that seems a little bit off to me. I don't like the way I'm feeling. I don't like the experience, something about it. That's feedback, which is prompting you then to apply what it is that I've pointed out, which is, okay, well, let me take a look and find out what is it that I'm doing that's producing this experience that I don't like. But again, it's challenging because society teaches us to pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, so to speak. It's a Wizard of Oz reference, where the Wizard of Oz is just a is just an ordinary man, but he's pretending to be the all and powerful Oz, but he's really just hiding in a booth behind a curtain. And so this is kind of, we're in awe of our experience, as though our experience is the great and powerful Oz, and we should be in terror of it. And what I'm pointing out here, preliminarily, is just that actually it's much more ordinary than that. It's much, much, much more ordinary than that. It's something that you're doing. You might not yet be consciously aware of it because we're usually not consciously aware of it. I mean, that's just how it goes. But you could become consciously aware of it, and through that, you then have the ability to make the change. But most people, even when they have at least an intellectual understanding of what it is that I've just said, they make all kinds of excuses. And I know because I do the same thing. I mean, I'm not some saint on a pedestal somewhere. I mean, I completely understand it. But because I understand it, I can speak with some degree of authority about it, I suppose, because I'm living it, and I have abundant evidence and experience of it. So I'm inviting you to take a look at that. But again, that's the context of what it is that I really want to share with you today. So now, uh, what might be a next step in the process? Or put another way, what is the obstacle? What's the stumbling block that prevents us from working with this insight, from actually benefiting from this insight? And I suppose there may be many obstacles, but one which seems quite significant is that we think we know things. We think we know things. In fact, we think we know a lot of things. We think we know so many things, and we categorize them when we say these things are good things, and these things are bad things, and these other things are neutral things. So we think we know, what things are. Okay, I know what that is because I can name it. There's the sky, there's a cloud, there's a truck, there's a lake, there's a tree. So if I can name it, I think I know it. It's not true. But that's the illusion. If I can name it, I know it. So, but most of those are neutral. I mean, you might have some emotional charge connected, some things that you can name, but for the most part, most of the things that you can name, they're neutral, but they're things that you think you know. Then there are things that you think you know, which have a negative emotional charge attached to them. Where you think, oh, I know that I'm such and such kind of person, and that's not a good sort of person to be. I'm an incapable person. I'm a foolish person. I'm a stupid person. I'm a less than person. I'm a whatever kind of person that you think of as being having a negative connotation. Uh, you think the negative meaning of things that you've done or experienced or that you perceive were done to you. So you say, oh, I was traumatized. Oh, these terrible things happened to me. Oh, I'm never going to get over that. I'm scarred for life. And so you think you know these things. And then there's also the things that you think you know that you think of as being positive because you have an positive emotional charge. I'm a good person. I'm a kind person. I'm a fortunate person. I'm a wealthy person. I'm a whatever, these good things have happened to me. I'm blessed in all these ways. So you think you know these things, positive emotional charge. So neutral, negative, positive. But what they all share in common is that you think you know these things. Now, knowing uh, maybe has some benefits uh, to a certain extent. Knowing or thinking you know something might give you some degree of confidence in your ability to perform a task. So that could be useful. Um, Although I think that that's probably not required. I think it's a sort of intermediate step in the learning process of thinking you know something. Because if you think about it, there have probably been times when you were maybe in the zone, so to speak, and you didn't know anything. You didn't know that you knew anything, but somehow there was flow. Everything was able to work. So you didn't know, but you still were quite competent and able to confidently achieve things. So I think that the idea of knowing something can serve a certain utility in the process of learning, but it's really a stepping stone. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the time we cling to that because we feel fundamentally insecure and afraid to let go of that to find out what would happen if we were to let go of it. Um, but I do want to acknowledge that there's it's not like knowing is a completely useless, valueless thing. It's just that it's useful to put it in the right context and understand in what context does it have utility and in what context is it limiting. And so having acknowledged that it does have some potential positive value, I want to focus primarily on the negatives of it because I think that's where we mostly get tripped up. So thinking, let's start with what I think is probably the obvious category of things that we think we know that causes us problems. That would be the things that have the negative connotation to them. So if you have negative associations with things that you think you know, uh, like if you think you know, I'm a incapable, stupid person. Well, how well is that working out for you? You know, this is probably, if you really take an honest look, you would probably recognize that it's causing you a lot of limitations, a lot of pain resulting from that, frustration, disappointment, discouragement, probably anger, resentment, all kinds of things that are not really serving you. And that's the consequence of thinking that you know this thing that has this negative connotation for you. So, with this category of things that you think you know that we could broadly categorize as negative, hopefully it's not difficult to recognize that's not working out well for you in the big picture. I also want to acknowledge, though, that that also has there's a utility in that. So it's not like we cling to the negative knowing just because we are gluttons for punishment and pain and suffering and misery, or because there's something wrong with us or anything like that. Rather, it's just a strategy that we developed trying to protect ourselves or help ourselves at a time when we didn't know any better way. So forming these kinds of limiting beliefs, these negative beliefs about life or ourselves, or other people, is was a strategy that we developed trying to actually help ourselves. So there was a positive intention in it. It's just that there are pretty severe limitations of that strategy, and in the big picture, it doesn't actually give us good results. In a very limited context, it does function to try to serve a positive intention. It's just that in the bigger context, it's not good. So, and the good news is this, that whatever those beliefs might be, those things you think you know that are clearly hurting you in the bigger context, you form those at a time when you were not at your most resourceful. You were not considering all of the options. You weren't really having uh, as complete or uh, functional understanding of reality at that time is available to you now. In other words, there's a lot more that's available to you now, so that you could actually choose, discover, and choose and practice better options that would give you better results rather than clinging to the old so-called knowing that's actually hurting you. So, so hopefully that makes sense. That the things that you think you know that are uh, negative, have a negative, we could categorize them as negative knowing. Uh, those are actually hurting you in the bigger picture. So continuing to cling to knowing, thinking that you know those things, is limiting you and causing harm. Now, there's also the things that you would consider to be positive, right? So it's said there's the negative, the positive, and the neutral. So hopefully the negative, it's clear how that's not really working out so well for you. But you might think, well, but all the positive things, those are definitely working out well for me. Uh, well, it's probably less obviously and acutely harmful compared to the negative knowing. But the so-called positive knowing actually also serves a similar function to the negative knowing. These are strategies for, uh, still strategies for self-protection. If you think you know something, even if it's a positive, it still creates for you a functional limit because the knowing says go no further. There's nothing beyond this. This is the ultimate truth and reality, and so you don't need to look any further beyond this. But you don't. You by definition, then you're keeping yourself limited. Even if you still categorize it as positive, it's still limiting you, and you don't know what's beyond that that might be even more beneficial or positive for you in your life. And you won't know as long as you cling to that so-called knowing. So between the two, the negative and the positive, most likely it's probably most likely to serve you most. You'll probably get the greatest benefits most quickly by focusing on dissolving your certainty of knowing of the negative. But I think it's useful just to keep in mind that in the bigger picture, all knowing, even if you think that what you know is positive, is still limiting. And so it would probably be beneficial in the long term to question knowing even the things that you think you know that are positive. And so too of the things that are neutral. Uh, probably, probably, and this is a generalization, but probably the things that are neutral have will have would in most cases questioning that knowing would probably have the least significant impact, which might be a little surprising because you might think that the questioning the positive things would have the least impact. But I think actually the positive things, questioning the knowing of the positive will probably have a very significant impact. But anyway, so those three categories, negative, positive, neutral, all of them create limitation. Probably of the three, the category that produces the most severe and unpleasant limitation, most likely, would be the negative. And therefore, it's probably most useful to apply what it is that I'm going to invite you to, primarily to the negative. But really, I think that it's useful to apply it broadly across all categories. Um, so now getting into how could you actually work with this? So the idea, well, let me tell you uh, briefly a little story about how I came to discover the value of what it is that I'm sharing with you today. So, and a lot of you've heard this variations on this story before because I do tell this story quite a lot. So yeah, I don't want to bore you with it, but for those who don't know the story or don't know the context, I think this can be useful to understand how what it is that I'm proposing can have a very even dramatic impact on a person's life. It certainly has for me. And then I can also tell you about some of the uh, pitfalls and limitations of this approach, which will, I think, it will be useful to have for you to have the context of understanding how I've experienced this in my own life. So I uh, I was uh, I was making myself miserable, extremely miserable for the must have been the majority, if not the entirety of the first 34 years of my life. And it I didn't know that there was any other way. I thought it was just normal. I thought that's what life was like. I thought that's what life was because that was all that I knew. That was how life was modeled for me. That was what was reflected back to me. And so I just thought that's just how it goes. Uh, so I didn't really question that too deeply, although I did rail against it uh, because I felt angry, disappointed about what I perceived was the nature of life. So I felt very isolated, lonely, angry, frustrated, disappointed, and that that that's for as long as I can remember. And then in my early 20s, when I was living independently and was starting to make money, then I really started to seek out some way of feeling more empowered. And so I was trying all kinds of things, meditation, affirmations, psychedelics, yoga, massage, hiking, various, going to all kinds of workshops and uh, various groups of various kinds, exploring various topics, and on and on. Tried so many different things, and really did not seem to make any dent in the suffering. In fact, over time, it really just got worse. And then by when I was 31, 32, I don't know the exact, it was in that age range, 31, 32. I had gotten to a point where it really I had basically collapsed. My health was very poor. I was extremely fatigued all the time. I was, I would literally have to kind of work up the motivation to stand for, and it would take me like sometimes an hour just to get from the point of having the thought I would like to get up, I'd like to stand. It'd be a good idea to stand, trying to imagine myself standing, trying to work up that motivation to actually get myself to standing. I was in pain all over my body. I had severe insomnia. I had very significant digestive problems, on and on. And I felt depressed, angry, desperate. And so I realized, and I should say that at that point, I had, so I knew that I had been bitten by a tick. I had all of the symptoms of acute Lyme disease. I had the bullseye rash, and I had migrating joint pain and swelling. And so I attributed at that time most of the symptoms that I was experiencing to Lyme disease. So then I went down that rabbit hole and I started reading about uh, chronic Lyme disease, and it all seemed very hopeless. And I became just very, very uh, hopeless. And so there came this point where uh, it dawned on me that I really didn't know. I really didn't know anything. What, I didn't know what anything was. I didn't know what the name or cause of anything was. I didn't know uh, anything at all. And starting to really question what it is that I thought I knew, just started to tease it all apart and unravel everything. And it was in in significant part through that process of investigation that uh, things began to shift, things began to open up. Because up to that point, kind of what I had described earlier to you using the metaphor of trying to pry open the fist with the other hand was the approach that I had been taking to life. I was continuing to do the things that were generating my misery, but I was trying to fix that by doing other things in addition. So I would do the affirmations, I would do the affirmative prayer, I would do the meditation, I would do the yoga, I would do the fasting, I would do the various diets, I would do the all the things. I would go for the hikes, I would do this, stand and stare at the horizon, the candle gazing, the all the things. The the breath work, pranayama, and all of that was a layer of effort on top of what I was already doing to generate the misery in the first place. So it was completely unreasonable for me to expect that making more effort on top of what I was already doing to produce the misery, especially without any actual awareness of specifically what I was doing to produce the misery anyway, it was unreasonable for me to expect that any of that was going to produce any real transformation. And of course, it didn't. So it was through, in part, through this questioning, through this investigation, through this discovery, uh, and not just a theoretical discovery, but an actual immediate revelation that I don't know, that I was able to start to actually become aware of what was happening, what I was doing, because I was starting to actually come into direct contact with it instead of remaining uh, sort of at a distance from it, unaware of it, just functioning at an intellectual level, at a theoretical level. Instead of that, I started to actually embody my actual experience. Because the thing is, so now let's make this very practical. Okay, so you could just notice right now, whatever you can notice about your direct experience, whatever that is. And I kind of have to use words in a way to point to this, but the words are never it. Uh, so just hear these words and use the words as a kind of a pointer for you to investigate directly, but don't get hung up on the words themselves or what you think the words mean. So you could notice that there's you have an experience of sensation, and perhaps there's an experience of color, maybe an experience of light, maybe an experience of sound, volume, uh, kind of a some sort of rhythmic experience. It could be experience of taste or smell. So there's these sensory experiences or sensory experience or experience that's occurring through these filters of senses that have all of these attributes, these qualities to them. And just notice that you're aware of that. You can actually just directly perceive or experience that. You don't have to have a name for it. You don't have to have a name for the quality or the sense or the location or anything like that. You don't have to have a name for it. You don't have to have some past reference for it either. You don't have to know whether you're hearing or tasting or smelling or touching or seeing. You don't have to know that. Your mind might be puzzling over that and trying to categorize, but you don't actually need to know because the actual experience is prior to the so-called knowing and understanding and analysis and categorization. The actual direct experience is so immediate. There's no room for something else to insert itself there. So you don't need the permission from life that says, "Oh, you now may proceed because you know what this is called. You know how to reference this. You know whether you're seeing or you're smelling." Life doesn't work that way. You don't need that permission. The experiencing is happening immediately, directly, instantaneously. That's the real aliveness. So you could notice that right now. So you could notice that in that actual directness of experiencing, knowing is not needed. In fact, really knowing is is something that happens after the fact, and it's not necessary. And this is really, if you think about it, this is a kind of a radical discovery. The more that you really explore this, the more radical you'll discover just how radical it is. But uh, it's not, for most people, it's not intellectually stimulating. And so, or if it is, then it just becomes a distraction. The intellectualization of it is just a distraction. And so people tend to, because they're conditioned to avoid the simplicity, the immediacy, the intimacy of the direct experience, they tend to leap right past that and into the so-called knowing. But I'm inviting you to just notice, just stay with the directness of not knowing. There's such a power in not knowing because I heard a story somebody related recently about how they this is a person who is interested in day trading, and they were were kind of uh, commiserating with some other people who they know who are also interested in day trading about how uh, it was a tough market and they had all the reasons why it's a tough market, and this is why they haven't been able to uh, have the kind of success recently that they wanted to have. But there was this other person who they all were acquainted with who uh, they were puzzled over how is this person doing really well because this other person's having great success. So eventually they talked to this other person. They said, "What? How are you doing so well in such a tough market?" And the person said, "Oh, it's a tough market. I didn't know." Because they didn't get that news, you see. I mean, so when you know, you think you know, then you go right up to that, and that's the limit. You don't go beyond that. You operate within the confines, and this is largely happening unconsciously, but it's the consequence of thinking you know. But notice when you don't know, then there's no limit. So you could just notice right now what's in your actual direct experience, where's the limit of the experience? Can you find the edge of it? Can you find where it begins, where it ends? Can you find the 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 uh the boundary between seeing and hearing? Can you find the limit of being good or bad? In the actual direct experience, you can't find that because when you're just remaining with the immediacy and directness of this, then you don't know. There's nothing to know. There's no limit. There's no boundary. There's no beginning. There's no end. So you don't know where to stop. You don't know where to uh, hold back because there's nothing that gives you that indication. And I think a lot of the time, again, keep in mind that a lot of the things that we think we know, we developed those as strategies trying to protect ourselves because we had some experience and we decided that was a bad experience. I don't want to repeat that. So let me put up some safeguard. So the knowing, this supposed knowing, is kind of like metaphorically, it's like a sign that says go no further. Beyond this point lies great danger. So stay here or stay on this side of the sign. Don't go beyond it because you'll get yourself into trouble. So the knowing serves as that reminder, and we usually obey that. And again, there's probably it can serve a certain useful function in the learning process, but it also because constraint can be useful in a certain context, but when we forget about what its actual nature is and we start to mistake that for reality, then we get ourselves into trouble. So I'm just inviting you to discover the power of not knowing. So you could just notice again right now that you don't really know. You don't know. I mean, until you consult some mental images and thoughts and narrative, who are you? In the immediacy of this experience that's here, what can you say about who are you? Can't really say anything without consulting some so-called knowing, which all is referencing some past ideas, past limitations. And again, that might have a relative benefit, maybe, maybe not. But it is whatever benefit it might or might not offer. Uh, in addition to that, definitely serves as a limitation. And limitation is not always bad. In fact, it's not inherently bad. It's just what it is. It's just limitation. But we can relate with limitation in a way that it ends up being painful, that ends up being out of alignment for us. And so to really recognize the truth, if you want to call it a truth, I don't know what to call it. If you want to recognize that you don't know what you thought you knew, or at least the basis of the knowing is not as solid as it seemed to be, opens up new possibilities. I mean, those possibilities, they're not really new possibilities exactly. I mean, those possibilities were always here, but it opens up your perception of those possibilities. So you're functionally blind to the possibilities that don't fit with your so-called knowing, as long as you cling to the so-called knowing, as long as you say, this is how things are, this is this is what I am, this is my limitation, this is how life works, this is just my lot in life, I've got to deal with it, then you're functionally blind to any possibilities that don't conform to that narrative, which is, again, it's not bad. It's just what it is. It's useful to recognize that, though, because if you feel like you're out of alignment, if you feel stuck, if you feel limited and you're not liking that, but you don't know what to do, it's very likely that everything that you have done trying to solve that problem and anything that you would come up with to do trying to solve that problem, so long as you cling to the so-called knowing, will give you more of the same. It won't actually result in real transformation because it always has to stay within the confines of what you think you know. You can't go beyond that. And because if you're obeying that boundary, which is what the knowing produces, then your experience is always going to be confined to that boundary. And it's never going to go beyond that until you venture beyond that. As soon as you venture beyond that, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, look at that. All kinds of other possibilities. But you didn't know about them as long as you were staying within the constraints of what you thought you knew. So just to notice that you don't know, and you don't need to know, which is not to say that knowing has no value. Again, I just want to be clear about that. But if we mistake the knowing for truth with a capital T, if we think that that's the absolute reality, that's going to be disappointing. So, in my own experience, like I said, I had been struggling, trying, straining. I had made so much effort trying to fix the problem of my life without actually experiencing any fundamental transformation. And that ended up being extraordinarily painful. And it was only when I finally caught this glimpse of not knowing and began to explore that in earnest that my life actually began to transform, because I then started to discover more of what it is that I was doing to produce the unwanted experience. Through that awareness, I was able to then begin to let go of some of the things that I had been doing habitually, unconsciously, to produce the experience that I didn't want. And therefore, my experience began to change. Through that, new possibilities that had not previously been evident to me started to become clearer, more evident, which allowed me then to begin to explore those new possibilities. I couldn't have done that before because I was functionally blind to them. So it was only through exploring not knowing that I was able to discover possibilities that I hadn't previously been aware of. And exploring those possibilities also has contributed to transformation. Um, so I know in my own experience the power of not knowing. It's been extraordinary and it's really continued to be extraordinary. So that's why I am pointing this out and inviting you to explore that for yourself, which hopefully you've been doing as I've been suggesting this to you. And so I also want to acknowledge some of the uh, challenges, let's say, of not knowing. So, so not knowing, um, of course, it opens up so many things because previously, as I've repeatedly stated, the knowing creates a sense of a boundary or a limitation. So as long as I think I know, then within my consciousness, I stay within that defined territory of what I think I know. And everything outside of that, for me, functionally doesn't exist. So that's obviously, as I've pointed out, it's limiting. Now, limit, as I've also repeatedly said, limitation isn't inherently bad. It's just limitation, and it serves certain function that can be potentially useful, but it can also become painful. So the recognition, acknowledgement, and exploration of not knowing can dissolve those limitations, open up new clarity of of possibilities, and that there's a kind of liberation in that and an expansion, which is really lovely. However, without any kind of boundary, then it does it can produce some challenge when it comes to uh, certain kinds of movement. Certainly, it presents some real challenges when it comes to kind of assertive or aggressive, uh, egoic kind of uh, action. And while some people view that kind of action in an entirely negative light and they want to get rid of that from their lives, I would offer some caution against that because uh, you can apply not knowing to that as well. So you think, a lot of people hold this truth that the ego is bad. The ego is the cause of all their suffering. Uh, but I would question, do you really know that? Uh, maybe the ego is like knowing itself has certain functional benefits. So it's not that knowing is bad or ego is bad, but maybe having the right relationship with knowing and with ego might be skillful means, whereas uh, the wrong kind of understanding or relationship might result in problems. So it does seem that being uh, blindly identified as the ego and egoic impulses and thinking life is all about uh, me just indulging whatever impulses arise and being short-sighted and seeking out short-term gain at any expense. Uh, maybe that's not the ideal way to live one's life. Maybe it is. I don't know, but maybe it's not. Through some investigation, maybe we might uh, start to question whether that's the optimal way to live life, and so we could start to investigate the relationship with the those egoic impulses, and maybe start to allow for some shift to take place. But I think to then swing to the opposite extreme and determine, well, the ego is the devil, it's the problem in my life, and I need to get rid of it. I question that. It's not clear to me that that's true, and to not have any, to never know anything, uh, I think makes it it provides its own kind of limitation in life, ironically, um, because it cuts one off from exploring those experiences in earnest of having some kind of drive, ambition, uh, uh, desire, and pursuing it for uh, and pursuing it with vigor, with enthusiasm. So having some, let's say, ground that you can push against, a limitation, a boundary that you can push against to give yourself some uh, uh, um, ability to propel yourself in a direction. It is an experience that that does does exist. It's not. I don't see any obvious evidence that it's inherently bad or problematic. And so I don't see any reason to then try and cut oneself off from that. So I'm just wanting to be clear that I'm not advocating that it's necessarily skillful to become motionless because you determine that not knowing is the real virtue. And so to declare that you will never know anything. I suppose that I, at the heart of it, I don't perceive that I can know anything. I've yet to find how I could know anything with any kind of finality or certainty. But I've found that I guess it seems possible to play with knowing, to kind of hold it lightly rather than clinging to it as the truth, but to play with it as a an experience does seem possible, something I'm personally curious about. So the more that I don't know, the more I realize how I still think I know things, including thinking I know that I can't know. And so it allows more. play, which I wouldn't have expected. I had the expectation, I think, that it would uh, be different. I think I had the expectation that it would uh, become increasingly groundless. It was already seemingly groundless, but I thought it would just become even more groundless forever, increasingly groundless, and that I would have to somehow adapt to that until there was no sense of any one whatsoever. And I found that that doesn't seem to actually be the case, at least not in the way that I thought it would. So I'm just saying that don't I would encourage you not to take anything that I'm pointing to here as truth with a capital T, or to make it into dogma or rules for living your life or anything like that. But it's an invitation to explore, because I think, well, I know for myself in my own experience, and I believe likely this is generally true, that this exploration of knowing and not knowing uh, is very enriching, and that it allows for, as I've said repeatedly, real, genuine transformation, uh, so that you don't have to just keep working harder uh, and ultimately working against yourself. So hopefully some of that makes sense to you and is workable for you. And of course, you're welcome to do with that whatever you wish. Um, so that's where I'm going to wrap up this portion for today. And then if you have any questions that you'd like me to address, then I welcome you to put those, for those who are here live, you can put those in the chat and I'll respond to those. And then once I've responded to all of those, then we'll wrap up for today. I'll also mention to anybody who has not yet gotten access to the free self-awareness course that I offer, I encourage you to get access to that. It's available at my website at joeylott.com/SA, the letter S for self, the letter A for awareness. And I'll provide the link to that in the description on YouTube. It is very complementary to what it is that I've shared here today. It provides a very, I think, very practical way of slowing down internally and bringing more awareness to the internal process, which allows you to question, inquire, and and discover those new options and possibilities. So again, if you don't have that already, I encourage you to get access to that. It's free, and all you got to do is go to my website and sign up for it there. And so, like I said, if anybody here live has any question you'd like me to respond to, you can put that in the chat. If there's nothing, that's absolutely fine as well. But if you do have anything, just put it in the chat and I'll respond to it there. And for those who haven't been around for a little while, I changed the way we're doing these on Mondays. So it's I'm only taking the questions in the chat. Somebody says the knowing sounds interchangeable with beliefs. I mean, yes, I'd say that that's true. All right. Somebody says this is kind of a long one, so I don't know. There's a question here, but I'll read it and see if there's a question. So it says, when you said not to see the ego as an enemy, I do find myself to still want to have an ego death, but not in the sense it's an enemy as much, but more so as I want to live as presence and awareness and not the ego who is thinking, self-sabotaging self who is stuck in old ways, but rather to transcend it into presence and observation, even observing the so-called ego as well as in awareness. I know you said transforming is a better verbiage than dying to the old self. Yeah, I mean, I think that generally that the generally death for most people, for most entities have a self-preservation um, function that's built in, and so they entities tend to resist death. And when presented with the threat of death, they usually will resist. So it's generally just not skillful to uh, to wish for or threaten any entity with death, because it's very, very, very likely to produce resistance. And if you think about it, what you want is not the death. What you want is what you believe that that will offer you, which is to live as presence and awareness. So you could think about, uh, what if the so think about the ego as an entity, let's say, uh, is exists for self-preservation. So there's some sense of being a self. There's some sense of being an independent self. And the ego is that entity which is responsible for the preservation of that sense of being an independent self. So anytime that there's a sense of being threatened, then the ego is, by definition, is going to step things up because that's its job, that's its function. So if what you want is to experience the presence and awareness, you could, another approach would be to help support the uh, perception and experience of being, uh, for lack of a better word, I'll say safe. Because if there's no threat, then that function isn't going to be activated. So if you can, the clearer you can get that there is no threat, that there is no possibility of threat, then that ego function is uh, not activated. So then you get what it is that you're wanting, that sense of presence and awareness, because it's not being obscured by this uh, resistance, this protective function of the ego. So this is why I advocate for befriending all parts of yourself and working with all parts with the assumption that all the parts have positive intention, that they're actually aligned ultimately with your true uh, desires. And then for finding the ways to achieve those positive intentions in a way that are most harmonious for you. So, uh, I mean, because if you think about it, if so, if you knew, and I'm not proposing that this is the solution, but just as an example of a remedy, if you knew yourself to be the totality, if you knew that regardless of what uh, sensations, what images, what sounds, whatever perceptions occur, if you knew, not just intellectually, but really, truly, thoroughly knew that you are eternally existent, if you knew that there was no possibility of any harm to you, regardless of what things occur, regardless of the perceptions, if you really knew that, then would you need to defend yourself? Obviously, you wouldn't. So, uh, I'm just proposing that as one example of a way that could achieve what it is that you're wanting without trying to kill off the ego. I've got another one here that says, "What does exploring not knowing mean practically? I'm not sure how to work with that. When I try to explore the limit of my experience, it seems like it is limited by either my body or my imagination. I can sense it's all one inner experience, but I don't really experience it as limitless, which in itself feels limiting." Uh, so, so, so you say, that seems like the limit of your experience is limited by either your body or your imagination. So you could explore those. So you could start with your body. So how do you know about your body? And how do you know that? Uh, let's just start. Let's just keep it as simple as possible. So how do you know about your body? So you have a thought about your body. You have image of your body. You have uh, sensations that you associate with your body. I guess you could smell and taste, um, hear. Okay, so you have the sensory uh, perceptions that you associate with and give meaning to as body, my body. So if you examine that directly, well, how do you know that any of those things actually mean my body? How do you know that? And as you examine that, you probably would have to realize that you don't really know. You don't really know that any of that means my body. You've given it that meaning, but you don't know that it actually means that. So, uh, so, so what you're actually experiencing are sensory perception, and then you've associated some of those things to form this construct that you have accepted as true, and you think, I know that this is my body. I know that I am my body. I know that that's a limitation of me. Apart from the that narrative, though, how do you know that that's true? So, um, and then when you say, so that's the body, and then you say it could be limited by imagination. Well, what's the limit of imagination? How do you experience a limit of imagination? I don't know what that is. I don't know what a limit of imagination is. So, but you could just notice what is that that you what is it that happens that you then give that meaning to? You say this is the limit of imagination. But how do you know that that's the limit of imagination? Apart from having that narrative, what's the evidence? Um, so it's really just to note. It's really about noticing because you say what does it mean practically? It's about noticing where you think you know something, so you've given a meaning, and you say this, the meaning is this is a limit of my imagination. And then the practical application is, well, how do I know that how do I know that that's true? How do I know that, what's my evidence? How do I know that whatever it is that I'm experiencing or perceiving, that I'm giving that meaning to actually means that? How could I know that? You know, you could ask yourself, have I ever been mistaken about anything before? Where I believed something was true and then I found out that it wasn't true, that I had been mistaken. So if I've ever been mistaken, well, then I could be mistaken about this too. And I would say probably, although I can't know this, but probably it's true that uh, we're probably mistaken about anything and everything. Whatever we think about something, we're probably mistaken. And it's just a matter of time before that becomes clear to us. So, I mean, that's been my experience. Anything that I think I know in time, it's revealed to me that I was mistaken. Sometimes only a, sometimes it's just a small revelation where I could still cling to, well, I was mostly right, but there was just one small thing. Okay, but if I was mistaken about one small thing, I could be mistaken about any of the rest of the things too. And lo and behold, over time, it seems to be the case that I'm. It's revealed to me that I was mistaken about those things too. So it's just seems like over time, whatever knowing I think I have is eventually eroded, and it's revealed to me that I didn't really know that. I just thought I knew that, but life reveals that it's not. It doesn't seem to be the case. It just doesn't hold up to my theory. Regarding the question if I'm interested in translation from English to Croatian, um, I'm I for to the person who asked this, I remember that you did send me an email, and I apologize that I forgot to respond to that. Send me one more email, and I will uh, I intend I will intend to respond to the email, so we can explore that, and I'll better understand what you're wanting to achieve through that. Somebody says, what scenarios is the parts method most effective for? Is it just for resolving compulsive negative habits? I think so this is specifically, I think you're asking when you say the parts method, you're probably talking about what I refer to as the parts integration process. Um, I think that it's very broadly useful. Uh, Anytime that you experience any kind of inner conflict, which would be uh, most things, anything that you're experiencing, uh, because if you think about it, if so consciously you would like to feel awesome, right? I mean, consciously you'd like to have unlimited money, adoration, love, abundance of all kinds. You want to feel pleasant sensations all the time. I mean, consciously this is what you want, but uh, to the degree that you don't experience those things, then it's as though there's a part of you which is choosing something other than what you want or think you want consciously. So this results in an inner conflict because one part of you consciously wants one thing, another part of you subconsciously wants something different. So you experience that as an inner conflict. You experience that as some what you might call it frustration, disappointment, discouragement, anger, anxiety, irritation, impatience, whatever. Uh, so the parts integration approach is useful for anything that meets that criteria, which would be a lot. So anytime that you're experiencing something that you would not consider to be optimal, using the parts integration method could be very helpful. So I think it's one of the most broadly applicable and useful tools that I'm aware of. So you could use it for all kinds of things. Um, so somebody says, after my near-death experience, I find it hard to interact with the outside world. What should I do? Well, I think that having uh, having a very big experience, something that reveals uh, just how much you don't know, or how big of a gap there is between what you thought you knew and what seems to be true, can be jarring and can uh, produce the kind of outcome that you're describing, where you find it difficult to interact with the outside world. Uh, so, what I find helpful is to ask the question, what is it that I really want? So, it, my what I will propose, and again, I don't know, but this seems to be a useful way to understand, to work with experience. I think it's helpful to to consider that uh, every every action, every activity, every experience is initiated by a desire. So there's a desire that gives rise to this lifetime. There's a desire that gives rise to your soul. And that uh, desire is wanting, we could say, wants to be resolved, completed. So that is the shape of the life. That's the shape. That's why that's the purpose. And so this is why you could do so many things in this life that maybe society would reward you for and say, "Oh, you're such a success." But if it doesn't align with the purpose of your life, it doesn't matter what the world says. It doesn't matter how much supposed worldly success you have. If it hasn't aligned with the purpose of your life, it's not actually fulfilling for you. Conversely, doesn't matter what the world says. If the world says your life is meaningless and stupid, but if you are aligned with, if your life is perfectly aligned with the purpose of your life, you actually experience fulfillment. So, uh, this question of so if you think about it, before this near death experience, you were going about life in a certain way. You had certain ideas, certain uh, motivations, certain ambitions. And this near death experience revealed something to you. Uh, of I would guess it revealed something to you of a misalignment between how you were living and your purpose, what's true for you. So, uh, trying to just go back to the way that you were living wouldn't make sense, because if you were living in a way that was out of alignment with your real purpose, then it wouldn't be ultimately fulfilling for you to try and go back to that. So instead, I would recommend you ask, what is it that I really want? What is the purpose of this life? But I really think just asking, what is it that I really want, is is more useful in most cases than saying, what is the purpose of my life? Because the purpose of my life can sound a little bit uh, daunting. But if you just say, what is it I really want? And then listen to that part of you that has that clarity, and write what that part says. Don't censor it. Just write what that part says. And then uh, from there, I think then the next things follow somewhat naturally, because there's desire, and then there's the knowledge, and then there's the action, and it really needs to be in that sequence. I mean, if you don't have the desire, then having the knowledge and taking the action won't really satisfy anything. So you have to have the desire first, clarity of the desire. Having the desire without having the knowledge, uh, then you can't, you're just kind of stuck. Uh, Taking action without having the knowledge is very unlikely to give you the outcome. So but it starts with what is the desire. Then from that, naturally, the knowledge, as you give attention to that desire, it already contains within it its uh, ultimate expression in like seed form. So through inquiring and connecting to the desire, you start to also connect to the knowledge which is already there in it. The knowledge already exists in it. And so then naturally, with you, when you have the desire and the knowledge, it begins to express through action, unless you have resistance to that. So if you encounter resistance, then you can let me know, and I can give you some other suggestions for how to work through that resistance. But um, nor, but if, as long as the first step is always knowing what you want, because that will give you the right direction. And so that's my recommendation. Another one here that says, my question is regarding manifesting material wealth, financial freedom. Last time I told you that I focus on the feeling and would say that I spend most of my day feeling it by now. First, it was only a couple of seconds when I would focus on it, but then it slowly started becoming how I feel generally. Now, you said the feeling is great, but to have an image is helpful as well. So an image of me having that, or is focusing on the specific amount enough? Also, do I have to, for example, change my job, find another one where I could potentially make more, or I just let go and allow the universe to take care of it? I have to say it feels even weird asking this question, because it feels like I am implying it's not there when actually I feel that it is. Um, so as I've said before, I mean, if if you're getting the result from what you're doing, then the the result really uh, speaks for itself. So the result lets you know that what you're doing is successful. So, uh, and you have within you, everybody has already within them the the true knowledge for what it is that is needed, and their own way and path. So anything that I can say is a pointer, and could be useful, but don't be overly reliant on what it is that I have to say. Always look within yourself ultimately and let your results speak for themselves and be the feedback that lets you know. So I'm just assuming that you're not totally satisfied with the results. And if that's true, I mean, if that's not true, then disregard anything that I say. But if you are dissatisfied with the results, uh, then as I've said previously, usually the feeling is uh, usually the feeling for most people, the feeling is only part of what's needed. And so having a specific image is useful because the specific image helps you to, it gives you more direction, more clarity, and it helps you also to start to identify and then be able to release whatever resistance you have within yourself. So if you don't know specifically what it is that you want, then it's challenging. It's not impossible, but it's challenging to manifest that. So for most people, doing the work to specifically identify the form that they would like that to express as is useful and will be more efficient than just staying with the feeling. So then, uh, so yes, I would recommend you say an image of me having that. Yes, I recommend that you get clear on what what uh, what is that for you when you experience that feeling. In what circumstances do you imagine that would be uh, natural and aligned and fulfilling for you? And imagine that. Now, for some people, I think for most people, but not everybody does it this way, but for most people, it tends to work best to imagine seeing yourself. So, in like you were seeing yourself on a video in that scene of what it is that you're wanting for yourself versus putting yourself into that in an associated fashion. Because for most people, but again, not everybody does it this way, but for most people, putting yourself into it first person associated will uh, tend to reinforce the sense that you already have it, which, although many people will claim that that's the way to effectively manifest, it turns out statistically, for most people, that is not true. Uh, because statistically, for most people, and again, not everybody, so this might not be true for you, but for most people, statistically, when they imagine themselves associated first person into it, it strengthens the sense, the feeling that they already have it, and then uh, that will uh, signal to their nervous system that since they already have it, then they're no longer interested in achieving it. It's sort of like uh, you're not going to be motivated to go to the restaurant if you just ate dinner. But if you're hungry and you imagine yourself going to the restaurant and eating at the restaurant, your mouth starts to water and you're highly motivated to go. So for most people, it works well that way to imagine yourself as though you were watching yourself on a screen in the scene, experiencing what it is that you want. Then, and now that might diminish the sense of the feeling of already having it. If it does, that wouldn't be unusual because when you imagine something in a dissociated way, like what I'm describing, then it does tend to diminish that felt sense because the felt sense is usually, for most people, most easily experienced when you're uh, associated into the experience first person. But uh, again, for most people, that sense of gap between where they perceive themselves to be and where they want to be actually has a magnetic effect, which will draw them to into that. Uh, so it's usually more effective that way. Um, when you say focusing on the specific amount, uh, it it's possible that that could work for you. I mean, that's why you have to experiment with what actually gives you the results. One test of this, I think, is what reveals the most resistance. Not that your aim is to experience the most resistance, but rather, if there is resistance, if you have resistance, then whichever way of imagining it that reveals that resistance best will probably be the most effective for you because part of the process also is making that resistance conscious so that you can then release it. Because the basic equation is whatever it is that you put your attention on, that's where the energy goes. Um, so if you consistently put your attention on whatever it is that you want, then that gets the energy and it takes that form and develops the substance. But if there's resistance, then what happens is every time you try to put your attention on what you want, instead the attention gets redirected to the resistance, which means that the energy is not going so much to what you want as it is to the resistance. So most of the resistance is usually subconscious, but it still has the same effect of drawing the attention and energy to it, even though it's happening largely subconsciously. As long as it's not conscious, it's difficult to release it. So the resistance is getting the energy, drawing the energy away from what it is that you want. But as long as it's not conscious, you can't do much to change that. So when you imagine what it is that you want, then pay attention to what resistance surfaces. So the resistance could show up as uh, all kinds of things, but I think one of the easiest ways to work with it is to identify any thoughts or mental images that come up that contradict or interfere with what it is that you want. So if you imagine yourself having €1,000,000 and then you notice that you have a thought that says, I, I can't have €1,000,000 because I'm not good enough, or I can't have €1,000,000 because people like me can't have that much money, or I can't have €1,000,000 because nobody in my family ever has €1,000,000, or I can't have €1,000,000 unless I work myself to death. Whatever, so if you notice these kinds of thoughts, then that that gives you limiting beliefs that you can work with. So the basic formula is um, identify what you want, put your attention on that consistently, become aware of whatever resistance is there, release the resistance, continue to repeat that process, and eventually you will have cleared enough of the resistance that your energy is then consistently and sufficiently going to what it is that you want, so it will take shape and um, form in your experience that way. All right, we got another one here that says, when someone shows up for me, I notice I shift into managing their emotions instead of receiving them. What is the actual internal action I'm taking in that moment that converts care into responsibility? I'm not asking how to receive, but what am I doing that blocks it? So the well, so you have uh, I mean, in a case like this, probably statistically, it's very likely that you develop this pattern in early childhood, probably in relation to parents. Um, wouldn't have to be parents, um, but usually would be, where you uh, developed the idea, probably not consciously, but you developed the idea that you can't be safe when other people are experiencing uh, certain types of emotions. And so you learn the strategy uh, of being hyper aware of other people's feelings and then trying to manage that in order to for you to feel safe. Uh, probably some is probably an intelligent thing to have done at a certain point in your life when you didn't know that you had other options or you didn't have other options. But obviously, at this point in your life, it's not serving you overall. So, and in fact, what it really ends up doing is you find yourself a, attracted to and attracting to you people who fit that profile for the most part, and you end up rejecting people who don't fit that profile. It's all happening unconsciously, but um, it's a big energy drain. So, a couple of things. I mean, of the tools that you have, there's a couple that stand out that could be really helpful. You wouldn't have to use both of these, but you could experiment with either of them. One would be to use the parts integration method. So there's a part of you which is choosing to try to manage other people's emotions. I've already proposed to you why I think that probably is, but you could just dialogue with that part, ask that part what its positive intention is, and either use the standard parts integration method or the core transformation approach to help integrate that part and help it to be more resourceful so that it can achieve that positive intention in a way that's more harmonious for you overall. That's one possibility. Another possibility would be the 3 points of view exercise. Uh, so one of or the other of those exercises, or both, would likely be helpful in that case. Um, and have patience also. I mean, not that I'm necessarily suggesting that it has to take a long time in order to completely resolve that pattern, but uh, but be willing to be patient, because if it takes 1 day, 2 days, 5 days, 14 days, however many days it takes to sufficiently transform that pattern, it will be very worthwhile especially when you consider how much of your energy that consumes. So that's I think will be helpful. Second question from the same person. It says, I understand when I'm tightening intellectually and sometimes even in real life in the moment, I don't want to open up blindly all the time. How do I stop this tightening without collapsing boundaries? Well, yeah, it's a great question. So, um, so you could have like uh uh let's say you could define rules for yourself of how you play the game. So if you find that supportive. So if there are situations or circumstances in your life where you experience certain kinds of challenges, you would like to improve that, then you could find, define those boundaries for yourself. In other words, have the rule sets and guidelines for yourself about how you do that, what you say yes to, what you say no to, whatever. You define that for yourself, and then uh, just play that as as a game. So this is just okay. Let me try playing it this way. So then it's not an identity thing. It's not like you need these boundaries in order to protect your identity. And if you don't have the boundaries, then like you are dying or you're betraying yourself or something like that. But rather, these are some boundaries and rules that you are defining in order to make the game more enjoyable and profitable. And so you could have that kind of playful attitude about it, and that might help. And then within that construct of, okay, this is the game that I'm playing, these are the rules that I'm playing the game by, not necessarily forever, but to try it out and see what kind of result that gives me. If I like that result, great. I can keep that change. If I don't like the result, I can always go back and revise and come up with a new rule set. Um, but if if you have that commitment that okay, within this context for this time frame during this event, whatever it is, these are the rules I'm going to play by. Uh, you might find that gives you more freedom to then uh, be internally present and open within yourself, uh, because you're gives you more of a sense of safety. So you could play with that and see if that's helpful. Somebody says, could this put us in a continuous self-doubt mode or amplify this uncertainty mode I'm frequently in? Yeah. So great question. Yes, this is what I was uh, one of the things that I was trying to describe as one of the challenges of not knowing or inquiring into not knowing, um, is yes, if uh, you can take it that way. And so I think a couple of antidotes to that. One is you can apply the inquiry also to the self doubt. Because self doubt also depends, if you really investigate it, you'll find that self doubt also depends on thinking you know certain things. Uh, so if you investigate what you think you know that's producing the experience that you call self doubt, then that could alleviate the self doubt. That's one thing. And then another thing, which might seem somewhat contradictory, but it's not really, it's more complementary, is um, that you could also explore this as a game where uh, you could play with knowing, but with the acknowledgement of not knowing, so that the knowing isn't this kind of rigid thing that seems necessary for self-protection, but rather it's just a framework that you play with, where you just kind of like what I was mentioning to the previous person, where you just define for yourself, I have an objective, whatever that objective is. So there's some, in a certain context, you realize that you would like to achieve something, whether that's having a certain feeling state or having a certain material outcome or whatever it is. I mean, whatever, any kind of objective, but you have a certain objective within a certain context. The context could be at a certain event or at the office or within a certain dynamic in a friendship or in relation to money or whatever. It could be any context, but there's a context, there's an outcome that you want, and then uh, you could just define for yourself what's the framework, what's the structure, what is the rule set that you're going to use in order to be able to hopefully, ideally, achieve that objective, or at least come closer to or further optimize your ability to achieve that objective. So then there are things that you hold them lightly. You're not claiming I know this to be the truth, but you're saying these are the boundaries of this game that I'm playing. I want this objective. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to play. Here's the rules and boundaries that I'm going to define for myself that I think are going to support me in achieving that. Uh, and so then they provide that kind of structure, which you don't have to cling to and say, I know this to be the absolute truth, but you can just say it's a kind of like a relative truth if you want. It's not really a truth, but I don't know what else to call it. It's just a framework or rule set that you define that you think is going to support you in achieving that objective. I think that can be helpful because that takes away the pressure to be right, or that somehow you're threatened if you're mistaken, because then it's just like, well, these are just the rules of the game that I'm playing, just because it's a game, because I have an objective that I want to achieve because I want to. This takes away a lot of the pressure if you do it that way. So you say you want to be happy. Well, what's the context? I think because you could certainly say the context is your life and you want to be happy in your life, and that could work. Um, and that's a pretty big context. Uh, so it could work in that big context. I mean, I've done that and I've had success with that. But I think sometimes it's easier to work with a smaller context, just because it's easier to see specific measurable results that way, and to be able to iterate more rapidly. Maybe depends how you do it. So what is the context? Is it just your life that you want to be happy, or is there a specific context for that? I'm not seeing a response, so I'll just assume that it's your life. And then you say, could I give an example of a structure? So could be like, uh, so presumably there are uh, times when you perceive that you are not as experiencing the happiness that you would like. So I think it would be useful then to identify, well, what are you doing in those moments that results in the non-optimal experience? Because there's always, it's our experience is an inner process. So there's always an inner process that results in whatever it is that we perceive that we're experiencing. So becoming aware of what is that you do that produces that would then give you some insight into, well, what kind of structure or framework would support you in making a different choice there. So I'll just make something up as an example. So let's imagine that I'm wanting to be happy, but I notice that using the example from the other person who was talking about how they find themselves trying to manage other people's emotions. Okay, so let's say I find that I'm sometimes not as happy as I would like to be because I find that I'm trying to manage other people's emotions. So then I could define some structure or rule set for myself, and I say, well, uh, so how about uh, I could I could have a rule for myself for this game that I'm playing, where I want to have more experience of happiness, that could support me, which would be uh, that uh, taking care of my own emotional well-being is uh, a good and appropriate thing. So that would be like a rule of the game, because I might find that I think, in those situations when I'm uh, trying to manage other people's emotions, I'm actually doubting whether I am whether I'm even fundamentally important enough or worth caring for. And I'm thinking it's more important that I uh, manage other people's emotions so that I can feel safe than it is for me to actually take care of my own emotional well-being directly, because I'm not sure that that's even a good or appropriate thing. Uh, so I could then just define for myself the rule for this game is that it is the rule is that it's good and appropriate for me to take care of my own emotional well-being first and foremost. So that could be supportive. Do I know that that's true? No, but I might find that that's a supportive rule for how to play the game in that situation. There's another one here that says, just as a follow-up to the parts integration question, with all these methods you've provided us over the years, it's a little overwhelming to keep track of them. Is it just a case of cycling through them and seeing which ones resonate most for us individually? Uh, yeah. And it really kind of just comes down to, I mean, the first and foremost is just slowing down and being aware of your internal process. That's the number one thing. If you did that, that does 99% of the heavy lifting. If you don't do that, then it's really difficult to see to to experience the potential of what is possible. So that's the most important thing, and that's why I recommend working with something like breath awareness on a daily basis, even if just for a few minutes. When you do that consistently, it it really brings so much more awareness to your internal process and to the choices that you actually have available to you. So that's the number one thing. If you did nothing else, I would recommend doing that. Beyond that, uh, in a sense, I would say uh, everything else is a derivative of that. And so it might seem like there's a lot of different things, but really they all kind of come from that self-awareness of the internal process and cultivating that capacity to slow down and actually experiment and make choices uh, in a way that cr stems from a greater sense of safety within yourself. Because otherwise, normally we're reactive, we're everything's happening really fast, and our primary focus is on the outside. I'm not safe. I need to manage everything on the outside so that I can be safe. That's the normal way that society teaches us. So, and that just doesn't give good results. So, the to shift the attention to noticing what's happening within, slowing down, starting to become aware of the options that you have within yourself that you can choose from a sense of inner safety. That doesn't mean that the outside is feels good. I mean, there might be things happening on the outside that you still feel uh, automatically reactive to, but you have more and more ability to just remain calmly present and observant of your internal process. And from that, then, like I say, everything else kind of flows. I would say that this probably the second most useful tool. Of course, your mileage might vary, but from my perspective, second most useful um, is to work with the parts of yourself with the understanding that they have positive intention. And I have a number of variations on how to do that, but if you just were to just remember, okay, there's a consciously I want one thing, but it's as though there's a part of me that's choosing this other thing. Uh, and that part of me actually has a positive intention. If you just did that much, that would give you a lot of benefits. So that would be my recommendation is start with breath awareness every day, uh, and then let that really start to inform your moment to moment so that you just remember anytime you're experiencing stress of any kind that you have that within you the ability to actually choose to slow down, just become aware of the breath, notice that internally right now you're safe. I mean, if you were not safe on the outside, in the extraordinarily small chance that that was the case, and there's something that you can do about it, obviously you should do that. But the rest of the time, which is almost all the time, you might not like what's going on outside, but there's actually not any real danger. This is where the ask framework, which is just a slight expansion of the self-awareness, can be really useful. Start by asking that question: is there any obvious present danger right now? And if not, then just bring your attention to yourself and allow yourself to slow down and observe the internal process and start to notice what options are available to you. Uh, so if you do that consistently, that's like I've said, that's like 99% of it. And then uh, you can, the second thing that I would recommend would be, as I said, just to notice anytime that you're experiencing internal conflict, that uh, the part of you that is, there's a part of you that's choosing whatever it is that you don't want. And that part of you is not your enemy. It actually has your best interests at heart. It's just functioning from limited resourcefulness. And that limited resourcefulness continues as long as you maintain the internal conflict. But when you take a different approach and you befriend the part and you accept that this part has a positive intention, that's really transformative. The rest of it is icing on the cake. Not to dismiss the value of it, but the underpinning, in order for it to be successful, is you have to understand that this part of you has a positive intention. You have to really accept that. And if you do that, then um, you can have success. So if you feel overwhelmed, just bring it back to those basics. And I think that would probably give you good results. Another one here that says Paul Hederman recommends satsang and reading non-duality books like A Course in Miracles, which gave him lots of avalanches in order to wake up to our true nature. He said all you need are two sentences to hit you the right way. Also, his mother prayed for him. Does the identified self just wait for the shift to occur of its own accord with the help of satsang, prayer, and non-duality books? Are there any practices the self can do, any causality to create that shift in perspective that isn't elusive? As awareness, I've been waiting to wake up for 10 years, listening to satsangs, watching your videos, reading about non-duality, but I'm still identified with self. Um, yeah, uh, I, so I'll obviously I have a bias, and I've tried to be pretty transparent about that bias. I've so I've never found personally that those kinds of recommendations of just go to the attend the satsang uh, really they didn't seem to work for me, and I don't know anybody personally uh, who has believes that that worked for them. So I've always had a more pragmatic approach, and what has been helpful for me has been to uh, take a more active approach of uh, inquiring into the actual nature of the experience and noticing what it is that I do that produces what I don't want. And through that, then to discover how to release that habit of doing what produces what I don't want. Uh, so, and to be more specific about what I mean about that. So because I attended lots of meetings and people would say, there's something energetic that happens, or you can't, there's nothing you can do but keep showing up, and come to my retreat. And it, in a way, it's a little bit seemed a little bit self-serving. Um, Although I imagine a number of the people were quite sincere, but that never gave me the results. It definitely increased the amount of inner tension I experienced and desperation. And for me, I got to the point where I was hoping, crossing my fingers, trying. I read the books, go to the meetings, attend the retreats, the workshops, try to be open and receptive to the whatever the energy supposed energy was that was going to produce this supposed energetic shift. I accepted that there was nothing I could do, and I tried to give up doing, which for me it was crazy making. I mean, I would try, I would try to do nothing. I would try, but I didn't know what that meant. So what actually, what that brought me to a point in my life where, uh, I genuinely thought I was on the verge of death. I had, I think, pretty good reasons to believe that. Um, I'll never really know, but it certainly seemed that way. And I, uh, what I can, and my story, which is just my story, so take it with a grain of salt, but I think it's reasonably true as far as it goes. Uh, is that I prayed. And it's interesting that you mentioned A Course in Miracles because that 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 was a time in my life. It was the first time I'd ever read A Course in Miracles. I'd been around people for years who were enthusiasts of A Course in Miracles, who attended A Course in Miracles study groups and so forth, but I'd never read it myself. And but I lived in a very small town in New Hampshire, and every is a population of 800 people, I think. Every town, more or less, in New England, I think, has a library. So even very small towns, usually very small towns have very small libraries, as was the case in this town that I lived in. But in that small library, they happened to, on the day that I went that time, they happened to have a copy of A Course in Miracles. And I was drawn to it and I checked it out and I started reading it. And I can't say that I understood hardly a thing in that book. It's very, uh, I, I found it difficult to understand. But I guess I felt that I had an experience. I prayed to whatever aspect of the divine would respond to me. Uh, I think I was always a bit paranoid, so wanted to be really clear that my prayer was directed to the divine. I wasn't gonna pray to the devil or something like that. I wanted to communicate with that intelligence which I believed had my genuine best interest of my soul at heart. And I prayed for help. And the help that I felt that I received, which seemed to be helpful, uh, was I was shown how to do the emotional freedom techniques, the EFT tapping. Even though I'm the world's biggest loser and I'm never going to amount to anything and I'm probably evil, I still completely love and accept myself. That I did that, and that began a process of shifting things, and uh, which led into the not knowing that I talked about today. So uh, I don't emphasize the EFT, the tapping itself, because, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't believe that the tapping itself or that formal protocol is necessary. I think what that pointed to uh, was more fundamental and important, which is what I share. But just to be totally transparent, which I have been in the past, so it's not like this is new. Um, that was the specific process that I was using, um, and that morphed for various reasons. Sometimes it was because I was too fatigued to actually do the physical tapping, so I would imagine tapping, and then I questioned whether the actual tapping was even necessary, and on and on. So it kind of morphed over time, but and eventually revealed what it is that I was talking about today, which was just I'm holding on to a bunch of stuff, and I'm unconsciously uh, doing things internally and then externally, which produce the experience that I don't want. I, with the caveat again that I don't really know, but it seems to me uh, that it's fairly repeatable process that seems to give good results to bring awareness to what is the internal process I'm using that produces what I don't want, and let me explore how to stop doing that. And for me, a big part of that has always been uh, reactive tension. So if I so if I have if I have a thought, it could be let's say I have a thought, uh, I'm a loser. Okay, so I have the thought I'm a loser. Well, what is that thought? Well, it's just, I mean, it kind of consists of sound, right? So I'm a loser. So just the sounds themselves aren't a problem. I mean, if we really break it down, start with I'm. Okay, so I'm, I'm is right? I'm consists of those sounds. So is a problem? Doesn't seem to be. E, no, doesn't seem to be a problem. No, doesn't seem to be a problem. And I can do that with each of the sounds. So if we break it down, I'm a loser. Each of the sounds, they don't cause a problem. So I, but if I think that fast enough, then maybe it seems to be a problem. I'm a loser. Oh, I don't like that. That seems to be a problem. But it's not the sounds in individually. Well, if the individual sounds aren't the problem, it can't be just like if I string those together in a sequence, magically these powerless sounds suddenly have power. I don't think that could be. What I've personally found is that there's a this tension that I associate with the sounds, and there's mental images and other things that get associated, but it seems like it's the sensation that is the linchpin of the whole thing. So you could test it out. Take any thought or mental image or whatever that seems to be troublesome for you, seems to be a problem, and try it out. See if you can have that thought or that mental image or whatever it is without the sensation. And if it's not clear how to do that, notice what is the sensation. So notice where do you experience the sensation, and notice how is the sensation produced. I have found that the sensation is always produced through some kind of tension. It's always a contraction. So there's an effort being made in order to produce the sensation. So it's possible to not make that effort. So so it's not about getting rid of the sensation. This goes back to the metaphor that I used of the fist. So if the fist requires effort to make the fist. If there's no effort, there's no fist. And that's why if I continue to make the effort and then I use other effort to pry open the fist, I'm not actually getting the outcome that I want because I'm still making the effort. So if I'm experiencing this sensation, there's some effort that I'm making, a contraction of some kind, so I can become aware of how I do that and I can not make that effort. So I don't have to try and get rid of the sensation. Rather, I want to get before the sensation and not make the effort to produce the sensation. Sounds more difficult than it really is. Uh, I think, maybe. But I mean, on a small scale, it's pretty easy. On a larger scale, there's challenge in it. But on a really small scale, just like one thing in this moment, how hard is it to not make that effort if you really slow it down? So what I've found is if I if I experiment by thinking the sound of the words or imagining the mental images, whatever it is that's normally associated with that sensation, but I remain at ease without making the effort, the contraction to produce a sensation, I don't have a problem. As stupid simple as that is, that was a revelation for me. Completely changed everything. Um, and I'm still working with that to this day. I mean, it's still having benefit in my life today. And that insight came to me 14 years ago. So 14 years down the line, maybe because I'm a slow learner or maybe because it's just that powerful of an insight, but I still benefiting from that, still, still useful. Um, so I personally disagree with the claim that the solution is attend more meetings and read more non-duality books. I think because it seems to be my experience, as far as I can tell, that having bringing more awareness to what is the process that I'm using to produce the unwanted outcome and how could I stop doing that actually produces real, measurable, as far as it goes, changes. And as I was saying to the person who asked about the ego death earlier, I think if I'm perceiving that there's some false self that is my problem and I need to be free of that false self, I need to wake up from the false self, then what seems to be the case is that I'm creating this inner conflict which reinforces that resistance because that so-called false self or ego is really just a function of self-preservation. Why fight? It's like the Chinese finger trap, if you know that thing, the woven tube that you put your fingers in it, and when you try to pull them out, it it tightens on the fingers, and you can't get the finger out. So it's sort of like that, where I'm making my so-called false self my enemy, and I need to liberate myself from it. Uh, but the more I strain and struggle to liberate myself from the false self, to dissolve it, to get rid of it, the tighter it grips because I'm activating its self-preservation function. What I found is by investigating in the way that I recommend, it subverts that. I mean, it avoids that altogether because instead I'm not making this so-called false self or egoic self my enemy. I'm saying, oh, you have a positive intention. You want to preserve this entity. Okay. Well, how about let's just find out if there's any real threats? I mean, so many things seem like threats. Why do they seem like threats? Because I react, I feel tense, and now I'm fighting against myself. But if I investigate that and I learn how to release that habitual reactivity so that I'm not activating that threat response, then then I don't have anything that I'm needing to struggle against anymore. So that's what I have found to be much more functional and useful personally. Uh, it's also possible that that I'm completely delusional and that some of these people who uh, say that you should attend their satsangs endlessly are genuinely, level 27 enlightened, and they know things that I don't, and I admit that that could be true. I just never found their approach to work for me. I got a question here. How can I apply this not knowing with this practical example? I wrote a script for a video, and when the setup was ready, I started to record, but I couldn't act natural anymore and was a bit overwhelmed. Does it mean the approach isn't the best? Uh, well, it sounds like, I mean, just on a very practical level, it sounds like you consciously you want to record the video and have a particular outcome that you perceive would be desirable, but it's as though there's a part of you that chooses not to act naturally. Um, and so practically, I think it would be useful just to talk to that part of you that's choosing not to act naturally, uh, and find out what its positive intention is and find a way to achieve that positive intention in a way that is harmonious with your conscious intention to record the video in a way that achieves whatever you want to achieve with the video. I think that would probably give you good results. I got a question that says, does the process you described with the goal, context, structure, and rule have a name? Have you spoken about it in any of your courses so that I can learn more and refer back to it? No, I don't think I, I no. It's the first time I've can recall ever having spoken of that in that way. All right. I think that was all. Thank you to all of you. Blessings to you all. Take care. Bye for now.